Good morning and welcome to our lecture on managing emotions in contentious negotiations within Canada's unique context. Today, we'll explore how emotional intelligence navigates Canada's multicultural landscape, politeness norms, and complex federal system. Emotions can be both obstacles and tools in negotiations, particularly in Canada, where inclusivity and conflict avoidance shape interactions. We'll analyze theoretical frameworks, practical strategies, and case studies, including Indigenous land claims and labor disputes, to understand how Canadian negotiators balance emotional sensitivity with substantive outcomes. By the end, you'll grasp how to manage emotions effectively in Canada's diverse settings. Let's begin with the role of emotions in Canadian negotiations, setting the stage for our discussion. Let's start with the role of emotions in Canadian negotiations, where they act as both challenges and opportunities. Canada's cultural emphasis on politeness drives restrained emotional expression, unlike more direct cultures. For example, in a 2019 Toronto business deal, negotiators used phrases like, "I have concerns" to signal dissatisfaction subtly. Research by Schroth et al., 2005, shows Canadians rely on indirect language and nonverbal cues, requiring keen emotional intelligence. Regional variations, Quebec's directness versus Alberta's reserve, add complexity. Historical emotions, especially in Indigenous negotiations, stem from colonial legacies, demanding sensitivity, as seen in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 2015 findings. Institutional channels, like environmental assessments, structure emotional expression. Canada's focus on long-term relationships shapes emotional strategies, prioritizing trust. For students, practice reading subtle cues and respecting historical contexts. Next, we'll explore genuine versus strategic emotions in Canada. Building on the role of emotions, let's examine genuine versus strategic emotions, a delicate balance in Canada's authenticity-valuing culture. Genuine emotions, like concern for environmental stewardship in a 2020 BC resource deal, reflect Canada's values of fairness. Strategic emotions use subtle displays, like controlled disappointment in a Quebec contract negotiation, to influence without seeming manipulative. Emotional framing, as in framing Indigenous talks around reconciliation, evokes productive responses, per Fisher et al., 2011. Canadians distrust overt manipulation, favoring authentic-seeming strategies. For example, a 2019 environmental deal combined genuine ecological concern with strategic economic framing for success. Regional authenticity expectations vary. Quebec negotiators value directness, while Ontario prefers restraint. For students, blend authentic values with subtle strategies and avoid overt manipulation. Next, we'll explore cultural dimensions of emotional expression in Canada. Following strategic emotions, let's explore cultural dimensions of emotional expression in Canada's diverse society. Indigenous styles, emphasizing storytelling, differ from mainstream restraint, as seen in a 2021 Manitoba land deal where narratives build trust. Quebec's francophone negotiators may be more direct, per Cairns, 2000, requiring adaptability in federal talks. Immigrant communities, like Vancouver's Asian negotiators, may be reserved, while Latin American counterparts are expressive. Cultural adaptability is key, using neutral language to bridge divides, as in a 2020 Toronto merger. Language choices, like collaboration over compromise, shape emotional perception. Nonverbal cues, like pacing in Indigenous talks, require sensitivity. Emotional bridging, per Coleman and Kugler, 2014, fosters inclusive dialogue. For students, study cultural norms and practice bridging techniques. Next, we'll discuss managing anger in Canadian negotiations. Continuing our exploration, let's focus on managing anger, a challenge given Canada's taboo against overt displays. Controlled firmness, like saying we need a fairer approach, in a 2019 labor dispute, maintains politeness, per Schroth et al., 2005. Structured outlets, like labor arbitration, channel anger constructively. Historical anger in Indigenous negotiations, tied to colonial legacies, requires acknowledgement, as per the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 2015. Cool-down strategies, like pauses in a 2020 environmental dispute, de-escalate tensions. Neutral facilitators, common in Canadian talks, manage anger effectively. In international deals, like USMCA, Canadians respond to foreign anger with calm diplomacy. For students, use structured processes and practice restraint to manage anger. Next, we'll explore disappointment and guilt in Canadian conflict resolution. Following anger management, let's examine disappointment and guilt, subtle yet powerful in Canadian negotiations. Disappointment is expressed indirectly, like, I hoped for more progress in a 2020 trade deal, aligning with politeness norms. Guilt appeals, tied to fairness, are effective, as in a 2019 environmental deal evoking ecological responsibility. Cultural differences, Indigenous holistic expressions versus Quebec's directness, require adaptability, per Coleman and Kugler, 2014. Constructive leverage, like combining disappointment with hope in Indigenous talks, drives solutions. A 2021 Alberta resource deal used disappointment over environmental impacts with optimism for sustainability. For students, use subtle language and balance negative and positive appeals. Next, we'll explore the power of positive emotions in Canadian negotiations. Moving to positive emotions, let's explore their power in Canadian negotiations, reflecting the country's cooperative ethos. Positive framing, like shared goals in a 2020 BC partnership, builds trust, per Fisher et al., 2011. Humor, used in a Toronto merger, fosters rapport. Creating win-win climates, as in Indigenous consultations emphasizing harmony, aligns with Canada's inclusivity. Balancing optimism with realism ensures credibility, as in a 2019 trade deal. Positive emotions, like shared environmental concern, add economic value by fostering long-term deals. For students, use collaborative language and measure emotional impacts. Next, we'll discuss emotional intelligence for Canadian negotiators. Continuing our discussion, let's explore emotional intelligence, EI, critical in Canada's diverse negotiation landscape. The four EI components, self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship management, are vital, per Coleman and Kugler, 2014. Cultural adaptability helps navigate Indigenous storytelling or Quebec's directness. Reading subtle cues, like pacing in a 2020 Toronto deal, builds trust. Managing emotions in high-pressure federal-provincial talks, like healthcare funding, requires calm. Developing EI for Indigenous relations involves historical sensitivity, as per the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 2015. Canadian organizations offer EI training for negotiators. For students, practice EI skills and seek training. Next, we'll explore emotional self-regulation techniques. Following EI, let's examine emotional self-regulation, essential for Canada's polite negotiation culture. Strategic pausing, like saying, let's reflect, in a 2021 labor dispute, aligns with Canada's measured style, per Schroth et al., 2005. Emotional reframing turns anger into commitment, as in a BC environmental deal. Cultural agility navigates diverse norms, like Indigenous storytelling. Pre-negotiation preparation, including historical research, prevents triggers. Recovering from missteps, like apologizing for cultural errors, maintains trust. Long-term emotional management, as in ongoing trade deals, prioritizes relationships. For students, practice pausing and reframing. Next, we'll explore Canada's approach to dispute resolution. Continuing our exploration, let's examine Canada's dispute resolution approach, favoring mediation over litigation. Government agencies, like BC's mediation boards, structure emotional expression. Labor arbitration, as in a 2019 Ontario case, uses neutral facilitators to manage emotions, per Lax and Sabinius, 2012. Indigenous land claims incorporate historical sensitivity, as per Natska, 1999. Interests-first approaches in environmental disputes, like carbon pricing, reduce confrontation. Corporate restructuring balances emotional and economic needs. Poorly managed disputes cost billions, per government data. For students, study mediation and interests-based strategies. Next, we'll explore the Niskaay land claim case. Let's apply our concepts to the Niskaay land claim negotiation in British Columbia, a landmark case. The issues included historical claims, competing oral and written treaty interpretations, and the emotional legacy of residential schools, per the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 2015. Actions involved a joint fact-finding process, blending traditional knowledge with legal arguments, and using culturally trained facilitators, per Natska, 1999. Outcomes included a co-management agreement, a healing fund, and ongoing meetings, fostering trust. For students, this case highlights Canada's Indigenous consultation requirements. Challenges were historical mistrust, but emotional bridging succeeded. Lessons include respecting cultural protocols, using neutral facilitators, and addressing historical emotions. Next, we'll explore the Alberta oil sands dispute. Continuing with case studies, let's examine the Alberta oil sands dispute, balancing environmental, Indigenous, and economic interests. Issues included ecological concerns, Indigenous land connections, and investor pressures, per Natska, 1999. Actions involved a multi-stakeholder process with emotional support, benefit-sharing agreements addressing historical grievances, and de-escalation protocols, per Coleman and Kugler, 2014. Outcomes included project approval with protections, revenue sharing, and a monitoring committee. For students, this case reflects Canada's resource-driven economy. Challenges were stakeholder conflicts, but inclusive processes succeeded. Lessons include designing inclusive consultations and addressing emotional concerns. Next, we'll explore Quebec separatist negotiations. Following Alberta, let's explore the 1995 Quebec separatist negotiations, a pivotal case in Canada's federal history. Issues included Quebec's cultural identity, national unity concerns, and economic risks, per Cairns, 2000. Actions involved back-channel negotiations, constitutional amendments recognizing Quebec's distinct society, and emotionally intelligent public consultations, per Lax and Sabinius, 2012. Outcomes included referendum defeat, constitutional recognition, and improved relations. For students, this case highlights Canada's federal complexity. Challenges were intense public emotions, but confidential channels succeeded. Lessons include using discreet negotiations and addressing cultural identity. Next, we'll examine the Canadian auto workers dispute. Continuing with labor, let's examine a Canadian auto workers dispute, reflecting Canada's unionized economy. Issues included worker frustration over wages, company competitiveness concerns, and past dispute emotions, per Fisher et al., 2011. Actions involved interest-based bargaining, neutral mediators trained in Canadian labor culture, and innovative job security provisions, per Coleman and Kugler, 2014. Outcomes included a 4-year agreement, training programs, and improved relations. For students, this case highlights Canada's cooperative labor tradition. Challenges were economic pressures, but mediation succeeded. Lessons include using interest-based approaches and mediators. Next, we'll explore the Atlantic Canada fisheries conflict. Our final case study examines the Atlantic Canada fisheries conflict, blending cultural, economic, and environmental emotions. Issues included competing scientific and traditional knowledge, community dependence on fishing, and conservation mandates, per Natska, 1999. Actions involved co-management councils, adaptive plans addressing emotions, and conflict resolution training, per Coleman and Kugler, 2014. Outcomes included sustainable quotas, new markets, and trust-building projects. For students, this case reflects Canada's resource management challenges. Challenges severance of emotional attachments, but co-management succeeded. Lessons include inclusive councils and community training. Next, we'll review references to conclude. As we conclude, let's review the references grounding our lecture. Coleman and Kugler, 2014, highlight adaptive conflict management in Canada's multicultural context. Schroth et al., 2005, identify emotional trigger words, vital for Canada's polite style. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 2015, provides context for Indigenous emotional dynamics. Lax and Sabinius, 2012, and Fisher et al., 2011, offer frameworks for interest-based negotiation, widely used in Canada. Cairns, 2000, and Natska, 1999, contextualize constitutional and Indigenous resource issues. For students, explore these for deeper insights into emotional management in Canadian negotiations, from labor to Indigenous contexts. Thank you for your attention.